Hey, it's Bram Duffee back with you for a public speaking class. We're talking about persuasion right now, and this is a continuation. You know, each person has core beliefs and values that make up who they are. And at the heart of every persuasion occurrence lies this complex tapestry of individual beliefs and values. Each person carries this unique set of convictions that is pretty much shaped by a lifetime of experiences and learning. And when we're doing persuasive type speaking, we have to understand the power of how the message has to be aligned with these deeply held beliefs. And so instead of just trying to override somebody or overwrite them and their thoughts, effective persuasion works within the framework of the existing values that they already have. And so it's all about inspiring change or to reinforce commitment. And the art of crafting persuasive messages is really specific and also has to be human because we're challenged to be genuine and creative, but also speak with purpose. And so I want you to think about how someone can have deeply held beliefs. And these deeply held beliefs would be considered the core of that person's existence and thought. And those types of beliefs are called primitive beliefs. So primitive beliefs are core beliefs about ourselves, about our existence, about who we are, our identities, and they're central to our lives. They're things that we already believe about the world, and it's all because of the things that we have experienced to get here. And so we have deep-rooted knowledge of those things. Very difficult to take someone's primitive belief and influence that because it's really about who they are. So if we take primitive beliefs and think about that as something that someone would hold on their inner self, their inner core, then out from that, just one ring, we talk about shared beliefs. So primitive beliefs are inner core, shared beliefs would be one out from that. And so shared beliefs stem from interactions and shared experiences with others. These kinds of beliefs form the basis that have us having conversations with other people and social interactions. They're less central than just primitive beliefs, but they do play a really vital role in establishing the common ground and understanding between individuals, So, for example, the belief that hard work leads to success can be a shared belief within a community. And those kinds of things reinforce the collective values and norms. So we have primitive beliefs at the core, and then shared beliefs at the outer stage ring. And then another ring out further from that, we could talk about derived beliefs. So derived beliefs are beliefs that emerge from a combination of other beliefs and are just less central to our belief system. And they often result in hearing other people's arguments or synthesizing viewpoints from existing ones. And so I think about derived beliefs as something that we get as a shared experience from maybe television, right? So a lot of times people know things about the world that they wouldn't have otherwise because they lived that life through that story. And so at the outermost rung, we have matters of taste because we've gone from primitive beliefs to shared beliefs to derived beliefs, and now we're out at matters of taste. And really what this is people who have relatively insignificant beliefs about the world. So this would be matters of taste count for like food and music, art styles, things that are easily changeable and don't have a lot of bearing on our core identity. So we talk about this hierarchy in belief structure because it's important to think about the level that you are touching for each person when you're activating their belief thoughts, and so if you have something that's on the primitive level, it's just almost impossible to influence. And so we know that that's not a good idea to attack. And so all that's going to do is make them put up an obstacle or a block to us. And so it's much more beneficial to etch away at it in a different way instead of a head-on collision course. So this is what changing beliefs is all about, is looking at these kinds of roles and thinking about what kind of emphasis your audience might put on the topic. Now, another important mentionable is the functional attitude theory. And the functional attitude theory is something that offers insights onto why people hold certain attitudes and how those attitudes can be changed. And so it identifies several functions that attitudes serve. So let's talk about some of the things that these functions that attitudes serve. One is a compliance function. Attitudes that bring rewards or deter punishment. To change these attitudes, somebody has to alter the reward structure. So, for example, if you don't laugh at someone's prejudicial joke, it's going to remove the reward because they're not going to get the laugh out of you. So compliance function would be one of those attitudes. Another one is knowledge function. Attitudes held to help explain and understand the world. So demonstrating inconsistencies or expectations can change these attitudes, like highlighting a successful women in fields that have prejudicial thoughts against them. So it might be maybe the military or something in the oil field, right? So these are considerations. Another function is the ego defensive function. And when we're talking about the ego, attitudes used to protect someone's ego or their self-identity are intrusive, because changing these attitudes involves removing the threat to that individual's ego. And sometimes it means that you have to send messages that build self-esteem and build security just to be able to work with that. The other function to mention is the social adjustive function. Attitudes influenced by peer pressure, social belonging, or conformity. These things decrease the appeal of the peer group, and nonconformity can change these attitudes. So it's important to remember the real intensity that can happen with following the social connectiveness and dealing with peer pressure. The last one to mention is value adjustive function. And this talks about attitudes that are held due to the intrinsic value of the attitude itself. So it's like something that might be deeply connected to the person's core values. And so if there's an inconsistency there, then that might prompt some change because of the importance that it has. It's important to think about these different aspects just because there are theories that go into deep understanding of the other person's attitude, belief, and thoughts so that we can understand them. And if we can understand our audience or understand what drives them and makes them the way they are, then it helps us be able to make the correct approach. The other thing I want to talk about while we're together is cognitive dissonance. It's a word that's used pretty often, and so I want to make sure that we can figure out how that feels and what that looks like in this class. And it's a psychological phenomenon. It is also a psychological phenomenon, and it helps us figure out about processing information and making decisions. So what it is cognitive dissonance refers to the discomfort or the tension that we experience when we have two conflicting thoughts or beliefs at the same time, or when our actions contradict our beliefs. So it's like this tension that isn't just an abstract discomfort. It can have real implications for how our behavior and our actions roll. So imagine that you're a really staunch advocate for healthy eating, but then you find yourself indulging in fast food. There's this clash between your belief in healthy eating and then your action creates this psychological discomfort. And that's cognitive dissonance. So to alleviate this discomfort, we can look at some strategies that would help. But it's certainly part of the decision-making process sometimes. Sometimes it's part of the persuasion process. And we have to think about and know that there might be a bit of discomfort that we add to the situation to create that change. And so cognitive dissonance might play a role right now when people talk about politics, because there's one belief that someone might have, and the information that negates that belief is going to create a friction. That friction is a difficult thing to alleviate. So we have to think about, this intensity is a balance between positive and negative factors. And so if the consequences of an action are mostly negative, then this feeling intensifies. And also, really, some of the things that affect this are the degree to how much you're committed to that decision or that behavior. And so we know that creating dissonance can help promote attitude change. It can also help someone perceive that there's more than one situation that they can evaluate or look at. And it can also, cognitive dissonance can also provide the appropriate level of incentive. So like too small of an incentive might not induce change, while too large of an incentive could mean that they would do something totally different because a bigger action is overcompensated for. And so knowing that this cognitive dissonance is there and with us allows us to take these kinds of things into account. Just what it is that is driving the person's beliefs, and based on that, how do we approach them in a way so that we're not going to be offensive and that we're not going to put up that wall. So when we're crafting our proposition, we think about how at the heart of every persuasive message lies this kind of proposition. It's like a statement that clearly articulates the stance that you're advocating for. And so is your audience opposed or uninformed or impartial or neutral? Each of those kinds of positions required a tailored approach so that your audience can move closer to your viewpoint. And so if your audience is totally opposed, then you have to consider a proposition that nudges them in your desired direction. And do that in a way so that you're not in complete transformation with their stance and not doing a competition. And if they're uninformed, then your job is going to be different. It's going to be to provide the basic arguments and information that they need to become informed. So also people who are totally in favor, those kinds of folks, we can shift their thoughts towards inspiring action or reinforcing their beliefs. But knowing your audience will allow you to craft this message, and so that you're not overwhelming someone, you're not upsetting someone, you're just crafting to where they're at. And so when we talk about audience analysis, it's very much most important in this persuasive realm. So the backbone of your persuasive speech comes out to be the reasons and the supporting materials that you present. And the reasons are the main point statements that summarize the different kinds of evidence that you have out there to show your audience why they should adopt a particular belief or behavior. So supporting materials are the concrete evidence that show off those reasons. So when selecting your reasons, it's just really important that they're directly related to proving your proposition. And so to let that happen, we start out with a purpose statement and make sure that these things are supportive of the purpose statement in a way so that we're open and above board with the communication, because what we are putting out there is going to be scrutinized. Is this something that's valid? Is it relevant? And so all of those considerations have to be made when you're adding in those important points. The other piece to thinking about how you are approaching your audience really has to do with some of the niceties. And having an emotional appeal can be one of those niceties. It's like emotional involvement can significantly enhance some of the persuasiveness of your speech. And so both negative emotions like fear and guilt or shame, and then positive emotions like happiness or hope or pride, all this stuff can be powerful motivators. And so the key is to balance these emotions in a way that pushes your audience towards whatever you want them to do without overwhelming them. When we use emotional appeals, unless they're backed with strong evidence, we have to know that those kinds of emotional appeals are usually short-lived. So that's like fast decision making that's not going to last forever, emotional appeal. But if you want something to set in with someone, we have to add that emotion, which could be fear or it could be glee, any mix of that with facts. So that brings us some of our strongest convincing methodology. The motivation that somebody has to act will depend greatly on where they stand to begin with, with the topic and how it sits with them in their core beliefs. And so motivation concerns the forces that direct behavior. And so aligning your incentives with Maslow's hierarchy of needs can ensure that whatever strategies are able to deeply resonate within their core. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basically referring to the fact that if you are going to talk to somebody and them hear you and interact with you and actually get it, then they're going to have to be able to prioritize what you're saying. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that I can't listen to you if my needs are not met first. And so if you're trying to get your audience to act, they have to be in a mental position to be able to pull that act off. And if they're hungry, or if they have needs to go to the bathroom, or any outside intrusive thoughts or desires, or all of these things can pull away from your audience's ability to connect with you, connect with the message. And so all of these things are important to think about, when we're crafting a message. And so we've looked at everything from fear to emotional appeals to humor. And then we've talked about a couple of different models of persuasion that help us think about how some messages are crafted in ways to shed light on positive or negative aspects. But at the end of the day, we know that it's important to be ethical when communicating, because the message that you put out there is one that sometimes you can't take back. And part of what you can't take back is your dignity and is your respect. And so we have to think about not just convincing someone for that moment, but having the trust with that person so that they can be convinced for the next moment and for the next. So Your assignment this week is to work on the persuasive speech. I know you'll do well. And I just want to recap with two important things. One is to choose a simple topic, and one that is not going to, that you can limit, that's not going to be overwhelming to work on. And the other thing is that we're making it a main goal to allow your audience to get through your presentation so that they can hear what you're saying without being offended and without putting up walls. So these are the kinds of things that we're focused on in persuasion, and I look forward to seeing your work this week as we continue the topic. Thanks.